Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the Harbor Freight new generation extra bright free flashlight. This is a basic utility light. For a long time, Harbor Freight had been giving out these little cylindrical, little 9 LED flashlights, and they were pretty useless. Then they started giving away the first generation of these, which had an array of LEDs like they do on the end here. Weren't particularly great, and then now they have the second generation one, which really isn't bad. Surprisingly enough, Harbor Freight does list these on their website for $4. Although when they give it to you for free, it's $1.75 is what they mark off on the register, so I find that a little bit curious. Another thing that's curious is they've been selling them for so long, they have their super coupon, but there are 7 different part numbers associated with this light from Harbor Freight, so definitely curious there. So many part numbers. Anyway, this is their free 3 AAA flashlight, and I figured I'd do a quick review, and we'll take it apart and look inside. But as far as a free flashlight, it's really not that bad. Definitely not the most durable or anything like that. It's pretty cheaply put together. You know, there's fingerprints on the lens on the inside from... They don't even assemble it with gloves. But it is cheap. It will last a good couple of days with some alkaline batteries. It comes with some really cheap, you know, Warriors carbon zinc batteries. And I'll point out a little issue I had when I did swap out the batteries. Maybe save somebody some hassle. Since Harbor Freight gives these out for free, there's like 1,500 reviews. And generally speaking, people like it. And I can see why. For a cheap little light, it has a little neodymium magnet, which is recessed, so it doesn't hold that well. But still, it's enough to just keep it onto a surface. And then, of course, this fold-out hook, which is on a little ball. This thing always seems to get lost in the ones I have. When you drop them, it pops out and never wants to stay back in. But if you're reasonably careful with it, the hook works out okay, and it can be moved into any type of position. And then a little rubber, you know, a little rubber grommet over the power button, so it at least helps keep some grid out. Anyway, 2 modes. You just have a normal end flashlight mode, which you can barely see, and then we have this floodlight mode, which is actually not too bad. This is what they call a cob or chip on board, and it's a lot of manufacturers are advertising lights like this. Harbor Freight has a much more expensive quantum one, which is quite a bit brighter, but this is just a bunch of surface mount LEDs, which are really cheap and provide the advantage of the little LED circuit is sitting on a board, so it helps dissipate heat much better than you can in an integrated package like a traditional LED. So it allows them to pack more power into a similar size area in getting a brighter light. So that's why some of these manufacturers are like Cobb. You can get single LED elements that are on little metal backings that are 20, 30, even 50 and 100 watts. You can go on eBay and find single LED chips that really are 100 watts. But they're expensive, and so doing something like this allows you to increase output while maintaining price and dissipating the heat over a wider area. And after this thing is on for at least a good couple hours, it does get just a little bit warm. You can feel it just get a little bit warm. They advertise 144 lumens, where this one's quite bright. I think they advertise like in the 500 range. Let's take a quick look at that. There we go. If we turn this on, it's actually not too bad. It's kind of hard to tell, but if we turn this one on, we can just see it's nearly twice as bright. What is interesting is on the low setting, if we turn this back on, we can see it's just about the same brightness as this is on the low setting. Really kind of showing that this is reasonably bright, which was a surprising thing. The early versions of these were barely bright enough to even be worth getting, even taking from them for free. Where this one's actually quite a bit better. It is nothing like the little quantum lights. This thing is really much brighter. But obviously you can't buy a 99-cent item and then get it for free. I realize doing some of the other demonstrations of how bright this is entirely dependent on how sensitive the camera. You can have a flashlight and a low sensitivity camera and it'll make it look dim, and a really high sensitivity camera and it'll make it look real bright. That's why I at least try to do some type of just a basic comparison against other lights. Anyway, the design is a little bit interesting. They have 3 screws, so it isn't particularly easy to replace the batteries, but I suppose screws add just a touch durability. and you don't have the situation where you're worrying about like a little plastic clip breaking or losing a battery cover. But at the same time, the way this is held, the screws are actually held onto these plastic protrusions, means that it isn't as good as you would think, just because when you do drop it, it'll tend to want to break these bosses off. They're called bosses, these types of protrusions, and obviously then the back cover doesn't work at all. So the one issue that I had when I was getting this, replacing the batteries, is inside here, these little metal tabs, they're set back into these little plastic slots, and then they're stamped and they have a little bump. Well, that bump just was not far enough to get it to push past this little plastic tab. So the batteries that it came with had the little tips on the ends are just a little bit longer than they are on the more premium alkalines, and the darn tip of the alkaline battery wouldn't come into contact with these. So I had to take a screwdriver and just bend these out, bend out the ones with the tip touches, just like that. Not too much, but just enough so it'll get contact, and that resolved my issue, so I didn't want to point that out. And then, of course, getting further inside here, we got 4 more screws, so at least they have a total of 7 screws just to hold the case together. The 4 main screws here are larger than the ones for just the normal back cover, so that's that. They are just basic little flange screws, or washer head screws, I should say. A washer head screw is just a screw, but they stamp, if we can get this to focus, just a little flange on it. It looks just like a kind of an integrated washer. It just provides a little bit of extra surface area. And then here we are with the inside, if we can get it to cooperate. There we go. And there's our last little screw. Pretty basic. It's like made out of ABS. There's our little lens, sits in there. Here's our reflector, and we can see like some of the fingerprints. It's really not so bad. And then we just have the LED element. The LED element just kind of snaps onto the back. We can see all that. This pattern in here is from the mold. This is the machining from the mold. When you inject it, you can see that they use a pretty high feed rate. There isn't any kind of finishing or polishing because they don't need to when it's the inside of the case. But whenever you take something apart and you see these odd kind of, I call them snail tracks, that's actually just the evidence of the end mill cutter that went along and cut the mold, and then this is just a mirror image of it. And you can see what I was talking about with the cob is these LEDs are actually mounted onto a little aluminum plate just to help dissipate some of the energy, and then just a basic 2-position switch. There is a resistor here, but I suspect that resistor is when you're running the front lights, and then it just runs the full 4.5 volts when it's running the bigger cob element. And oddly enough, actually I happen to have another flashlight here. We can see that the switch was actually intended to be mounted with 2 screws, but due to the fitment of that front lens, the little hole didn't line up, so they just didn't put in a second screw, which is a little bit hilarious. Anyway, I just wanted to show what was inside one of these and how this newer version is a bit improved over the old version, and do a little review of it. And one thing I'm realizing, I may end up picking up a couple more of these to do that, is this lens is actually big enough in the way that the LEDs are just mounted to a simple panel, is you could cut out each of these, the sides of the reflectors, and you could take 3 of these lights and then integrate all 3 of the LEDs into one and have one triple bright, or one triple string element is the word, gosh. One triple element light that would be super duper bright, and actually sounds like a good project. I'll probably do that pretty soon. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and all the people who comment. I go through phases of trying to reply to more comments, but I almost always read all the comments. And I really like everything. I try to do my best at least to respond to comments that are more specific questions, because, you know, those are people looking for information. Otherwise, until next time, Catus Maximus out.